point of this gathering is really to get all of these stakeholders and parties together to talk about trends in innovation, trends in technology. So the theme this year is advancing equity in innovation. And today we're going to explore issues concerning gender and racial gaps in the innovation system from a broad perspective. We're going to start on the beginning edges of that ecosystem timeline with the technologists and inventors, and then end up looking at resource or achieving resource equity for women and people of color in the innovation space. So we are focused on the gender and racial gaps, as I mentioned, in the innovation system, particularly when we're looking at underrepresentation of diverse inventors in the patent system, whether that's women and people of color. We're also looking at the resource inequities in terms of female and people of color as far as founders and startups. We are motivated to really focus on these issues just given the demand, the recent demands for social justice happening in the society, happening on campuses. Our students are asking about it as well, and the inequities in the technology and innovation ecosystem. And we also want to focus, since it's a law conference, on the need to examine the impact of these inequalities on the delivery of legal services. So I'm super excited because I know from the faces that I see in the attendance list, we have practitioners, patent attorneys, lawyers, law students, business folks, lawyers who work now on the business side, technologists, legal tech founders, and others joining us today. So I thank you for being here, and I appreciate your support. Okay. Oh, Thabu, thank you. Yes, you're like my Twitter friend. Do you notice that when you're on Twitter, you feel like you're really friends with people, but you've never really met them in real life? So, um, yes, that would be one. So let's kick this off. The flow of today is as follows. I wanted to give you guys kind of a setup. We're going to start this morning with two dynamic women talking about diversity within the patent system. And I want to do a housekeeping announcement to let you know that unfortunately, Joyce Ward from the USPTO could not be with us today. Some of you might know that there's some recent changes happening at the USPTO, and the director, Iancu, resigned last Tuesday. So there's a little bit of some flux happening on the leadership side, in addition to, of course, the changeover in the government administration team. So Joyce could not participate today, but we do have some phenomenal speakers. And I will also be moderating and talking about some of the issues coming out of reports from the Patent Office. So first up, we didn't really talk Holly or Elaine, who would go first, but we have Holly Fechner, who I see, so I'm going to introduce her, at Covington and Burling. And Holly is the executive director of a initiative called Invent Together, which is poised or created with the goal of trying to assist people of color, women, so those underrepresented in the inventorship ranks, as well as looking at trying to close those gaps. So I'm doing just a short commercial on Invent Together, but I would really love for Holly to talk more about that and the work that she's doing within the firm more broadly and generally. And then we also have one of the authors of an article that was in the ABA landslide. Oh, is there official hashtag for this event? That's a great question. The last time this came up, we created one on the fly. Um, I don't have a thought. I mean, we could talk about um, advancing equity hashtag. Well, whatever you guys want to come up with. Tiger 2021. I love it. That's perfect. It's simple. Um, we also have another speaker who is from Herity, Elaine Spector. And Elaine and her colleague, Latia Brand, drafted an article last fall in the ABA landslide looking at diversity in patent law. And their empirical piece was really focused on the data analysis around the background and folks who are participating in the patenting process at the patent office. And I think it's timely, and there's lots of other literature and scholars who are also talking about some of these issues. I'm going to put some of that information. Oh, and Morgan is here. Yes. Um, Thank you, Morgan, for sharing. I'm going to put some information in the chat as we have presenters reflect and talk about their research or their recent scholarly works on these issues and topics so we can actually get some additional dialogue going. And if you have questions, we encourage you to put those in the chat. We will pause for a Q&A after this morning's first panel offers their remarks, and then we will take a break. So given the timing and the nature of the remarks for the first part, we might break around noon, but no later than 12:15. And it's sort of a lunch break for those on the East Coast, or just a general break, whatever you might need. And we will resume at 12:30 sharp, because we have 3 speakers coming up at 12:30. We have Mira Dow, who is the director of LESI, and also a law professor and the recent author of a book called Unequal Profession. So she will talk about the race and gender gaps and inequalities in the legal academy. We're also pleased to have Kristen Sonde here, who's founder of Paladin, which is a pro bono a startup to help pro bono activities happening at law firms. And she just recently did a report and some studies on the diversity in the legal tech startup world, and she can report out on some of her findings. And then we're also pleased to have Gwilym Roberts joining us from London. So welcome and thank you for, well, I guess it's still the afternoon, so it's not too awful yet. And he's going to talk about what's happening more broadly, so he can give us some perspective globally, and also what they're doing within his firm and the law firms more broadly in the UK area about a call to action to address some of the inequities. And we'll close with Kimberly Bennett, who is a partner or a founder of her own firm and really doing some innovative legal services, legal delivery models, and working in legal tech. And she's also one of the sort of co-founders of the Atlanta Legal Tech Group, and they've been looking at racial justice this past 6 months or so. So she'll talk with us about some of her work and some of the achieving resource equity goals, along with Nikia Malicio, who's here in Atlanta, works at Georgia Tech in the Advanced Technology Development Center, which is a hub, sort of like an accelerator slash incubator for startups in town, and what we're doing and seeing there from the achieving resource equity space. So that's the day, or short-ish day in a nutshell. And I will see between Holly or Elaine. Ladies, who would like to go first?
Up to you, Nicole.
There's, okay. You know what, Holly? I see Elaine, but I don't see her face. So I'm going to have to get her on my screen.
Do you see, maybe now?
Because yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Hi, Nicole.
Hi. Hey, Elaine. I'm so grateful to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a great topic.
All right. So let's see. Here's what I'm going to propose, because I think there's synergy between your content, but I'm going to propose, Elaine, that you kick us off, because I think you've got some interesting data to report out.
Sure.
And then Holly, I'll have you follow, if that makes sense.
Sounds great.
Okay, great. So I'm a lawyer, so of course I put a presentation together. And this is the part that's the most difficult part, is making sure that I can actually access it. So just give me a minute as I try to share my screen. Can you all see that?
Yes, we are able to see that.
Oh, okay, great. So this topic, I mean, there's been a lot of work about this topic. I don't know if you all are familiar with Dr. Lisa Cook's work with regard to patent racism and the disparities in patent innovation. And part of what she talks about is making sure that underrepresented groups have attorneys and patent attorneys that are like them, that look like them. And that's really been deficient in our field. And before I jump into the statistics with regard to diversity in IP law, I want to talk a little bit about the legal field in general. I mean, you all are at a law school, so it's good to know the statistics with regard to the legal field. And there's really no question that the legal field is one of the least diverse professions in the United States. These are statistics. This is demographic representation in the legal field. Overwhelmingly white, even at the 2L summer associate position. As you go along the career continuum, by the time you reach equity partner, over or close to 90% of equity partners are white. This is the breakdown of women in the legal field. I guess women fare a bit better, as you all know. Probably you look around and see in law school, there's probably equity. In fact, I think women now are a slightly larger group with regard to incoming law school classes. By the time you hit the 2L summer associate position, we see our first dip. And then as you go along the career continuum, you'll see that by the time we hit equity partner position, there's only 20% of equity partners that are women. This again is minorities in equity partner roles. We see that 6% of equity partners are men of color. Only 2% of women of color are equity partners. And 2% of equity partners are openly LGBTQ, and 1% are disabled. So let's go into the specific area of patent law. So a lot of you probably know that patent law requires a degree in a hard science. My degree happens to be in mechanical engineering. My firm, Herity, specializes in the electromechanical arts, just very focused in the patent prosecution area. But there are other technology areas like biology, biotech, chemistry, where we practice. And so diversity has become very important to our firm. When I first joined Herity, there were, I think I was the 14th or 15th attorney, and they were all men. There were some diverse men, but they were all men, because our area tends to be in mechanical engineering. At least we could visually see that there weren't a lot of women. And it wasn't the first firm I joined in an IP boutique where I was the only woman. So we wanted to get, we wanted to see what kind of data was already out there. And so we found, AIPLA, which is one of the leading IP professional organizations, conducts an economic survey every 2 years. And this is taken from their economic survey from 2019. And you can see right out of the gate, with regard to registered patent attorneys, over 80% are male. And then you see that 86.5% are white. And then we're not talking about the equity partner position. We're talking about coming out of the gate. This is what the numbers look like. So in our space, we thought, we felt like our area was probably having a more difficult time as well, as far as underrepresented groups, that we, women especially, and I know when I entered into my engineering class my first year as a freshman at University of Maryland, there's a lecture hall full of engineering students. I think there was about 150 students, and there were 3 women. I mean, really, not a lot of women get into mechanical engineering. So because we specialized in electromechanical, we wanted to see what the breakdown was with regard to technology areas. So we wanted to differentiate between biotech, chemistry, electromechanical, computer science. And so we decided to run our own numbers. And I don't know if you know much about our firm, but Herity has an amazing analytics department. Ayana Marshall is here at the conference, who's attending today, is one of our analysts. And so we collect data directly from the patent office's databases, and we do a download, and we analyze it for our clients, patent statistics. We then decided, hey, let's look to see what we can find out about the patent bar and the registrants, and try to analyze the data we have. So we collected, I think there was about, at the time of the paper was written, there was about 47,000 registered patent attorneys, and we had collected data with regard to over half that number. So we downloaded it, and then we had to fine tune the data. So we hired a company to help us give us more granularity with regard to the data. It was optional to indicate whether you're diverse or not, and it certainly did not distinguish between female being diverse or whether you were racially diverse. But this is actually the first, before I can jump to the next screen. This is a historical gender breakdown of patent registrations by year, including racially diverse female registration information. We highlight racially diverse females. There's been a lot of discussion because racially diverse females fall into two categories. It's called intersectionality. I'm sure you all have probably heard about that before. Which category do I fall in? Am I in the racial category or the female? Like which one? There's two. They're a unique group, and we wanted to make sure that we saw the numbers with respect to that group. That was important to us. This is, again, historical racial breakdown of patent registrations by year, including racially diverse female registration information. As in the last chart, overwhelmingly white, not diverse at all. So this is a problem. This is a problem we're dealing with today. So this was the chart that we were really interested for our firm, for our personal or internal reasons. What does the statistics look like with regard to practice areas? And not surprisingly, in the electromechanical space, we see that there are only about 11.4 in electrical, 11.1 in mechanical, and not terribly racially diverse either. In the biotech space, which this number surprised me, I was surprised that they were the least racially diverse, but women are close to reaching parity in that space. And again, if you're an IP practitioner working in a large IP boutique, which I did in my career, my female friends were in the biotech space or in chemistry. So there weren't a lot of us in the electromechanical area. So this really caused us to consider how can we, I mean, ultimately we want to improve diversity within Herity, but we also wanted to move the needle with respect to minorities and female lawyers in the patent profession. I just want to briefly go over some of the initiatives that we have. One is called the Herity Minority Firm Incubator, where we have a 4-year program that's designed to train and help launch a minority-owned firm. Our first candidate came in last year. He's learning all about patent prosecution, app drafting. He's given all of our tools, our secret sauce. He's also learning how to run his own firm. How do you run a docket system? How do you run your accounting department? How do you hire superstars? We know that at Herity because our firm was founded 20 years ago by John and Paul Herity. So they are training this candidate to launch their own firms. And we also reached out to our clients and said, hey, will you promise to send some work to this candidate? And, you know, we had a client that said, absolutely, I will send them work. I mean, you worry about when you put your, you know, when you go out on your own, am I going to get business? So we wanted to make sure that when they went out on their own, that they would have business. Another program we have is called the Herity Academy. This is directed to recruiting underrepresented groups in engineering to advise them about a career in patent law. I don't know, a lot of students in engineering don't even know about patent law as a career. So we're focused on targeting historically black colleges and universities and other diversity programs within universities to target those underrepresented groups, including females, which are underrepresented in our field. So we hope with these free online courses to not only provide them with the education about a career in IP, but also the tools to succeed in career in IP. These classes are also open to law students. They are more focused on the electromechanical art because that's our specialty, but there are some basics that you can learn through these programs. And another initiative we have is our annual Women's Workshop in May, which is geared towards introducing female engineers, again, to the practice of patent law. And we have exclusive training. We have probably 6 or 7 guest speakers, chief IP counsel women who have just succeeded in their career to kind of give them the basics about rainmaking, developing a business plan, all types of aspects, work-life balance. So that's been really successful. We used to have it in person. We had about 10 participants, but because of COVID, everything has to change. So we went virtual, which allowed a lot more people to attend. We had 35 women from across the country. So we have a few other initiatives directed towards reaching these younger underrepresented groups. There's a lot of players in this space, but we hope to fill the need that hasn't been met yet. And, as I mentioned earlier, Dr. Lisa Cook has reiterated that innovation for underrepresented groups will expand when innovators can go to patent attorneys they can relate to, that look like them, and that can understand them. And I love the story of Sarah Blakely, who's the founder of Spanx. And for the women who are on this call, you probably have heard that product before. But she could not find a single female patent attorney in her area to patent her product. So we need more women and underrepresented groups to pursue careers in patent law, which will help the innovation ecosystem for underrepresented groups. So that's it.
That was awesome. I had no idea that your firm was doing all of that phenomenal work. I'm so excited that I will definitely link up with you offline. I'm like, wait, what?
And that's why I wanted to share it, because we're trying to get the word out about the programs that exist. They're free, and we the more people that we can reach out to and educate about these particular career paths, the better.
Absolutely, absolutely. I feel like I'm a test case in your data. I was barred in the patent office in 2003. Is that right? Yeah. So I don't. Yeah. I mean, I feel like my ecosystem. I know a ton of female patent attorneys, but when you look at the data, you're like, oh, yeah, it's really bad. So.
And what's your background, Nicole?
I'm chemical, so I'm a chemical engineer.
A little bit higher, yeah.
Yep, I saw that too, and I was like, "Oh, interesting." It was fascinating. It was taking me back to my years at Northwestern, and I saw and I was playing in the chat too, so it's very distracting. All right, Holly, and I don't think you have slides, which is totally fine. But I will share out Invent Together in the chat. But tell us about your practice as well, and how you got involved and how Invent Together came to be, because that is a great story.
Well, thank you so much, Nicole, and thanks to Emory Law School. It's such a pleasure to be here. And it was so interesting to hear Elaine's presentation, which really is a flip side of what we're doing. And remind me later, because there's a very particular connection between what Elaine talked about and what we're up to. So our work with Invent Together, and I would really encourage everybody to check out inventtogether.org. We've got a host of resources about this issue. But we start with two premises. One, I don't think I have to explain to this group, which is that inventing and patenting are critical, both to our economy and to moving our society forward. But the other one is that we live in a society and a country where systemic racism and sexism are pervasive. And part of what we're doing at Invent Together is to put those two things together to try to make progress in this area. We feel it's both a moral and an economic imperative that we work as a country and as a world to diversify who is inventing and patenting. And there's so many reasons for that. But let's start with some statistics. And I don't think this will surprise people, but it's really important to understand the baseline that we're starting from if we want to make progress. So we know that only 13% of all inventors who held a US patent in 2019 were women, and that Black and Brown college graduates hold half as many patents proportionally as white college graduates. And this, I think, is a stunner too. Children in families in the top 1% of income are 10 times more likely to patent than children in the entire bottom half of family income. So we're looking at issues related to race and gender, and also income disparities. And obviously those things are all connected. But from the perspective of Invent Together, we think closing these gaps would have meaningful benefits for individuals themselves, but for society as a whole. And that's why we created this campaign. We are partnering with nonprofits, with universities, with individual inventors to focus attention on this issue and make progress in two separate areas, focusing on important change in public policy, but also in the private sector and at universities, because there's so much that different communities can do to try to make progress and diversify who is inventing and patenting. But let me talk about some of the things that we've done as an organization. So one of the challenges that anybody working in this area faces, and we've worked with many researchers, including Dr. Lisa Cook at Michigan State University, Dr. Alex Bell, who did his research at Harvard and is now out at UCLA. But the challenge is that the Patent Office does not collect demographic data on patent applicants. So the researchers and academics working in this area have had to use different forms of name matching software to come up with even the statistics that I shared with you. So this is, I think, one of the most basic steps that the Congress can take is to ensure that this information is collected. Because if you don't know the full extent of the problem, if you don't understand it, it really impedes trying to make progress. So at Invent Together, we've worked closely with a bipartisan, bicameral group of members of Congress to introduce legislation to fix this problem. We were thrilled that in December, Director Iancu supported this legislation. We feel confident that this is something that the new administration would also support. So we would encourage everybody. We've got at our website, inventtogether.org, we've got a way for you to take a simple action to click a button to send a letter to your representative, to your senator, to support this legislation. It's called the IDEA Act, the Inventor Diversity for Economic Advancement. And we really do hope to make progress on that this year. Another initiative that we undertook was to pass a different law in 2018. This was called the Success Act. And it too was sponsored by Republicans and Democrats in the House and Senate, had wide support. And it actually asked the USPTO to look at the current literature on this problem and make recommendations about how we could improve the situation. And one of the wonderful things that came out of that was that the USPTO, through the Chief Economist's Office, undertook an effort to study the issue, and they put out a series of 3 excellent reports, which we'll drop in the link so that you can take a look at that. But in addition to supporting the immense value of inventing and patenting, the reports also documented what information we do know about the lack of diversity in inventing and patenting now, but also made it clear that this gap in terms of collecting the data was something that needed to be dealt with. In addition to those reports, the USPTO set up a national council. This is the National Council for Expanding American Innovation. They announced it in September. We have been working very hard. They've set up a series of working groups, and they're reaching out across the country to try to hear from people. What are the barriers? What are the problems that prevent women, people of color, and lower income individuals from inventing and patenting, and what can we do about it? So they are writing a report. They hope to release this report in June of this year. But very timely from the perspective of this conference is that the USPTO is actually requesting comments from people. So they have opened a portal, and we'll also drop that into the link. We would love to encourage you to share your thoughts with the USPTO about how we can make progress, what barriers you see, and what are the solutions for overcoming it. So I'm excited to note that we've got lots of interest from a public policy perspective. We're really excited that the new administration, President Biden and Vice President Harris, have made racial justice one of their key initiatives to focus on. So I do think that there will be efforts to make progress, because so far I've talked about various different legislative efforts, but the truth is there's plenty that the administration could do without passing new legislation. And I think particularly of some of the existing programs, like some of the programs that the Small Business Administration runs to provide support to entrepreneurs, to people who are inventing, patenting, and then trying to get their businesses off the ground. There's plenty more that the USPTO could do on their own. They do a tremendous amount already to support inventors, but a focus particularly on women and people of color and people from lower income groups could be something that they take on without additional legislation. So we're really excited because this is an area that I think has not been focused on nearly as much as it deserves to, given the critical importance of ensuring racial and gender justice. Part of what we're trying to do as a society is ensure that everybody can participate to their fullest extent. And it's clear that in terms of inventing and patenting, that's not the case now, but there are so many things we can do to improve that. We want to look to leadership from companies and universities. I'd like to call out a toolkit that the Intellectual Property Owners Association has created, which allows entities like companies to take a closer look at their own practices and do a self-assessment, because we don't need to just wait around and have other people try to solve this for us. Everybody at their own institution can take a closer look. How is inventing and patenting dealt with in terms of tenure? Do we have the right kind of mentorship programs? Are we doing the kinds of education for undergrads and graduate students about what it means to invent and patent? There's just a host of steps that those in the private sector and in universities can take on their own. So that's why, from the perspective of Invent Together, we really like to focus both on the public policy, but also on what everybody can do in terms of self-help to create progress in this area. Really look forward to people's questions and to work with everybody on making progress.
Thank you, Holly. We've had a robust comments in the chat and lots of links and content posted. So thanks, Morgan. You've been tremendous with giving us a bunch of really helpful stuff. Lots of stuff to noodle on. So I'm going to pick up with some of the nuggets from Holly's remarks. And Elaine, you covered it just so beautifully. I did some research since Joyce Ward from the USPTO could not be here, and their most recent report is looking at the progress and potential in terms of women inventors, right? And we were looking at some of the issues, or some of your data showed the patent bar, and in terms of representation there. But to my colleague, Professor Brown's question on why can't the PTO just start collecting the data, there's nothing stopping them. So your skepticism, Professor Brown, is absolutely on point. And I think the report that came out last July, the Success Act, which is another report from October of 2019, authored by the USPTO, I feel like they are building to this sort of climax of eventually we will start collecting this data, but I don't know. So I'm opening it up to, Holly, you're in Maryland, others are more involved with what's happening in the patent bar and with the patent office. What do you think? Do you think the USPTO will actually pay attention and this new sort of leadership team will start to collect some of the metrics that we're talking about?
Well, I think that's a great question, because that was our first question too. Why aren't you just collecting this information? I do want to make it clear that there is a version of a survey that the USPTO could do on their own. And we've had extensive conversations with the chief economist about that. And we do hope that they move ahead and do a survey on their own. But I do want to say that we do need legislation for them to collect it, because there are restrictions in terms of the kinds of information the government can collect. So that's why we are working so closely with members of Congress to pass the IDEA Act.
Yep.
And I did want to say, in terms of connecting what we're up to with what Elaine shared, is that this issue of the lack of diversity in the patent bar has gotten the attention of members of Congress recently. So Senator Hirono from Hawaii and Senator Tillis from North Carolina, along with Senator Coons from Delaware, who is the only patent attorney in the Senate that I am aware of. So we love working with Senator Coons because he really knows his stuff. They sent a letter to Director Iancu raising this issue. Why are the criteria that you need to use to get into the patent bar haven't been updated in years, and they're so out of date? But Director Iancu, in his last day in office, wrote back to them to say that he agreed that this was something that needed to be addressed.
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic as well. That was a great letter drafted by the senators to Iancu about changing the categories, because there were very specific categories enumerated. And interestingly enough, as pointed out this was based on a paper written by a law student who was a patent agent. And she essentially said, what's really interesting, I have a son who's applying and has an interest in computer science. He's a senior. And he thought this was ironic that computer science was listed, but it had to be accredited by this particular institution. And the leading Carnegie Mellon was not on that, wasn't approved. And so that's one of the leading, I think he considered it one of the top 3 computer science programs. There are other types of engineering. The names of the particular engineering programs had changed. So Iancu basically said, hey, I'm going to add all these new categories. They absolutely should be considered in this category A, because the nuances between the language and the degrees made no sense. With regard to opening the patent bar, with regard to design, he said that needs further research. They had investigated that in years prior, but thank you for bringing that up, Holly. That was, there is some movement to see, are we excluding women unnecessarily? So there's more work to be done in that area, but that's a great. I'm really the woman who wrote that to take that initiative was just kudos to her.
Well, and for all the law students who are with us today, take note that this started because Senator Hirono's counsel saw the article that this law student wrote, and that got them to write the letter to Iancu and look more closely into the issue. So you can make a difference. You can absolutely make a difference.
I heart you two ladies with a big old heart right now. Not I actually have the response from Director Iancu, or former director, and I was planning to raise some of the points in the letter, but you've covered it amazingly. And you're right, law students, um, it's it's almost like when a mother tells a child something and they ignore it, but when someone else tells the child something, they listen. Yeah. So all of the faculty, my my faculty on participating today, we've heard it now from people who hire our students. It's important, if you find an issue and you want to write about it, students, write about it, because actually people are paying attention. People are paying attention to your writing. And I need to find out who that student is and put her in the Twitterverse. Um, Yes, I totally agree. I saw some pushback, of course, from some white males on changing the different categories for patent bar eligibility, and we can spend a lot more time talking about that at a different conference. But I wholeheartedly agree that category A should be expanded to include some things that are clearly patent bar, like the things that most patent practitioners writing applications today are focused on, which is computer science. It's completely ridiculous. I thought I saw a hand in the participant pool. So if I think it was Greg Lambert, but if there's someone who has a question, let's open it up so we can start some dialogue from the audience a little bit, so we don't run out of time. And I see Yenny's hand. Um, I'll go with Yenny first because she's actually one of my students. Ola Yenny, you're on. Yenny, are you here? Or maybe she hit the wrong button too. Ha! Okay, never mind. Oh, I can't unmute myself. Oh, Amy, if you can unmute.
I just did. So every
Okay.
participant should be able to unmute themselves.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you, Professor Morris. Thank you for that little shout out. And thank you everyone for being here. I'm really enjoying the conference so far. I just wanted a brief clarification, right? Is it that, my name is Olayeni Odumosu, but everyone here can call me Yenny. I'm also a Black woman into an IP, so that was a nice preface. All right, so is it that Black patent applications aren't being approved, or there's a disparity in the amount of applications to begin with? So is it that they're not applying, like there's not enough applications, or that there are the applications, they're just not getting granted as much? Thank you.
Sure, that's a great question.
That's a very important question. And I think there's two parts to this. It is very clear from the data that it does have to do with the fact that there are not enough applications from Black and other diverse inventors. That's absolutely the case. And I think we can talk about a lot of reasons that lead up to that. So many different places that we need to make progress in terms of education and access to opportunities. I think the question of whether there is discrimination in terms of considering patent applications needs more study. I just don't think we know enough about that. There has been some research on the gender issue from some researchers at Yale, but I think that issue needs further study. But we do know that there is so much we can do to try to expand and encourage diverse inventors to apply.
What I would say, Yenny, when I went through preparing for the patent bar, many years ago. There's also a resource issue, which I think then sort of gets at the privilege sort of arguments here. Uh-oh, I'm hearing an echo. And that is, it takes a lot of time and access to the appropriate study materials to pass the patent bar, right? So if you're in a situation where you're required to work, it's much like the bar exam. There's some parallels there. And I think if you look at the data more than anecdotal comments, you'll see, people of color who struggle passing the bar exam might also struggle passing the patent bar if they don't have time, meaning they can, refrain from working and devote the time to study, and they don't have access to bar prep courses. So I was lucky my law firm paid for a bar prep course. It wasn't PLI at the time. It was another pretty popular course in the late 90s, early 2000s, but I think they went out of business. And I had access to a lot of material, but I had time to devote on the weekends, during the week to just studying. And that is definitely one of the reasons I think if we look at the numbers of people who've applied to take the patent bar who are of diverse backgrounds and then successfully passed, their access to the ability to put in the time might be one of the variables that are important. But you're right, Holly. I don't think it's been studied fairly.
And I'm sorry, Nicole, I need to clarify that I was talking about inventors getting patents, not attorneys applying to the patent bar. So sorry if I misunderstood the question.
I think it's both parts she's looking at.
That's both are needed. Yeah.
Yeah, it's both. Thank you, guys. I got the perfect answer. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see. Are there other questions? I'm seeing a lovely, robust convo in the chat. Let me go here. Karen. Okay, I see Karen and maybe one other person. But I'm going to say Karen. Yes.
Let me turn on all the camera and the mics. So I'm in-house, and I recently started, because I've seen all this out there, I've started paying attention to the fact that most of our inventors on the patents are male, right? And but we have plenty of female scientists. At my company, I've always been very impressed with the number of female scientists, and I've been looking at it, and I don't really understand what's going on, right? Because for inventorship, if you've helped create it, I mean, inventorship, you don't get to pick. It's not what you want it to be. It's what it is. And I'm like, how do we have women in the department? Why are they not on these applications, right? Is their contribution not viewed as important? Is it because they don't have the time to fight for themselves? Like, I should be on that patent. And what I found is, we have a system where people input their ideas, and it's always the men inputting the ideas. And I'm like, do they have extra time? And so for me, I see, because you would think, well, there just aren't enough women engineers or scientists. And what I'm seeing is we have plenty of them, but they're not on the applications. And so I raise this as a question to see if somebody has the answer, because I have the capacity and the clout to actually change it where I am. I just don't know what the problem is.
So
I don't understand it.
Karen, that's a great question. And I'm part of an organization called IPO, Intellectual Property Owners Association, and they have a toolkit to address the very problem that you talk about. Why? What are the root causes? Why aren't my female inventors coming forward? Why aren't my underrepresented diverse groups coming forward? And they have a toolkit for your company to analyze, like, first of all, what are the root causes and how do we address it? And sometimes they find that women tend to wait till their ideas more perfected, or this isn't worth it, or whereas men don't appear, and I don't want to be just stereotyping, but from the data, it looks like men can come forward with their ideas a lot quicker than women. So I would recommend, and maybe I can try to find it and pop it into the chat, It's a wonderful toolkit generated by the Women in IP, and it talks about increasing the diversity in innovation, specifically your issue.
I see there's a comment from Professor Bagley, and she also has her hand up. So, Professor Bagley, if you want to share some remarks.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, so a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, I was in research and development. And hi, Holly, great to see you again.
You too.
And I am a co-inventor on a patent, but I had to push to make sure that I was named on the patent. And another important thing, it was a female patent attorney in-house who came to me and let me know that a patent was being filed on something I'd worked on, and she had seen my name in the documents and wanted to know, should I be listed on the patent? And as we talked about, I'm like, yeah, actually I should. So you need to have female patent attorneys and women who are working in R&D. They need to know about the process and how to be included. So.
Well, I just want to thank Margot and Karen, because this is an issue that we confront regularly, is that a lot of people think that this is just a pipeline problem. If we get enough women trained and educated and into these jobs, that the problem will be solved. But that's certainly not the case. We have to dig deeper. We have to look at the culture of businesses, of universities. What is impeding women and people of color from really, getting the credit for what they've created, and all the rewards that go with that. So the IPO toolkit is great. I am hopeful that maybe a university will step up and try to create a version that's more tailored to the university's setting, because there are probably different things from a business and a university, different roadblocks or different stages that are important to try to grasp what is happening. But it's not a pipeline problem. It's a pipeline problem, but it's more than just a pipeline problem.
I literally double like that. Yes, it is. And one of the discussions that led me to discover Holly in the fall was through the VentureWell Foundation, where they were talking about some of the disparities, gender and racial disparities, and it was looking more at the inventorship pipeline. And we had a woman from WARF, so the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, and I sort of pressed her on that point, that Margot brought up and that Karen at least is looking at, because I don't think it is a pipeline issue in 2020 or 2021 now, right? I think there are some systemic sort of, cultural, political issues happening where women are contributing to the innovation, but not getting put through as a named inventor on whatever patent filings are happening. Autumn has something too. I see someone mentioned in the chat. Finally, that is helpful. Other questions? Let me make sure I'm not missing people. I think Karen's hand is still up, but I don't think she has a question anymore. I love this chat, I will tell you guys. One of the reasons I wanted to use Teams is because whatever I miss, I will go back to later this evening and capture all of these fun links. I definitely. Oh,
so
go
Nicole,
ahead.
I have a hard stop at 12.
That's
and
right.
You all please continue the conversation. It's a wonderful conversation, but thank you for having one. If anyone has any questions, please reach out to me. Please spread the word about our free programs, and thank you again for having me.
Oh my God, Elaine, thank you for joining us. Yes, I forgot about your hard stop. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
We will
take
follow
care.
up. Yes.
Okay, great. Bye-bye.
One of the things that I do want to encourage people as we talk about ways we can close the gaps and look at issues, Holly mentioned it in her remarks, is the USPTO is seeking comment on the national NCEI, so the National Council of what's the E? Equity and innovation?
Expanding American
Expanding.
innovation.
Yes. And I think it behooves all of us in terms of our time here this morning and this afternoon to share comments, to push for legislation, to push for them to collect the data, which might need the legislation to allow them to have access to certain private information on individuals. But it's important that we quantify and look at the empirical numbers in order for us to really figure out what the next steps and best pathways forward should be. And I see the IPO stuff that Elaine has shared. I'm just going through the chat. Julie raised a question here. So going back to Professor Bagley's point, Margot's point, I wonder how much access to justice plays into this, right? Are there others outside the patent bar that can help close this gap? That's a great question for this community because it's mixed, a mix of attorneys and inventors and others in the tech space. Thoughts?
Well, I do think that there is an access to justice issue here because, as everybody knows, filing for a patent and defending it can be quite expensive. So we certainly encourage all attorneys to participate in pro bono work to help this. Some law schools have clinics specifically focused on inventors and entrepreneurs. The U.S. Patent and Trademark Office does try to coordinate pro bono services in this area. It's a critical piece, no doubt about it.
Well, some of the work that we do at Emory within the Tiger program to assist inventors in basically the Atlanta area is sort of demystifying the process, right? So I find that there's lots of questions on what does it mean to have a provisional filing. I've heard, if I do this, this will bar me from getting a patent, or if I don't do this, this will bar me from getting a patent. So there's definitely an education piece that is also critical because I think people miss opportunities and disclose too early, and then they waive their patent rights and they don't know. And then there's also a huge access to justice in terms of resource inequity problem in terms of being able to afford an attorney and not enough pro bono services. Giving a plug for Georgia Lawyers for the Arts, for those here in the Georgia area, they do offer pro bono patent services. And I saw Chris Leiter earlier I see him now in the chat, and he's one of the folks who has been an active attorney, active with pro bono services through Georgia Patents, and we help inventors in Georgia. I think they also help some inventors in North Carolina, South Carolina, and maybe they were still doing some work with folks in Alabama. So yes, Julie, thanks for raising that. That is definitely one additional variable to this sort of multifaceted problem. Professor Bagley, I see your hand up again.
I just wanted to, in regards to Julie's question, point out that if you're at all familiar with the Day One project, the report was recently issued. I was part of that project, and this was for Day One of the Biden administration. The USPTO synthesis, we had one of the things is developing a holistic approach to incentivizing, in particular, African American and other minority inventors. And that's so Julie had mentioned, are there other players outside of the patent system? We propose maybe like the SBA, the Small Business Administration, working with entrepreneurs, working with HBCUs, finding ways to actually increase access to the patent system and looking at it more broadly and not just access to the patent system, but you need help figuring out oftentimes how to market your product and making sure that it actually is successful. So I'm going to try to put a link to that report in the chat if I can figure out how to do that.
No worries. You have until we get back, or at least until this conference closes at 2. So, yes, Brian. Oh, sorry. Somebody was going to call. Was someone going to say something, Nicole?
Nicole, it's Holly. I did want to point out that there is a huge champion for access to justice who is Representative Hank Johnson, who is is one of yours right there.
Yes, yes.
And I raise him specifically because he's on the House Judiciary Committee, and honestly, access to justice is one of his primary goals in his work in Congress. But more specifically, he is the chair of the Intellectual Property Subcommittee on the House Judiciary Committee. So I would really encourage all of you, I expect, some of you are actually constituents of his, to put this issue at the top of his list. He has been engaged. He was really helpful in passing the Success Act. They held a hearing in the House Judiciary Committee on patent diversity issues. We would love for him to do more on these issues in the new Congress, and continue to take a leading role.
Yes. No, I did not realize he was the chair of the IP subcommittee. So that is fantastic. So yeah, he's very approachable in terms of.
He's very approachable, and he loves to do things in the area. I'm sure he would consider speaking on these issues.
Yes, that's what I was just thinking about.
Yeah.
I was like, ooh, I'm going to put him on my
Yeah.
to send a note to his staff about talking to us at the law school. And yay, Margot, for sharing that day one project. Thank you. So I see a question, or at least a hand raised from, I think, Brian. Brian Jenko, are you still? Or that might have been by mistake. Are you trying to get on, Brian, or maybe that was a mistake?
Does he have to be unmuted?
He should be okay. Yeah. I don't know. I'm going to let it go. All right. It's not letting me unmute. Thank you for sharing that. Say, Amy, we've got one participant who is having problems unmuting.
It seems like I'm unmuted now.
Yay! There's the voice.
I wanted to ask about the gap between with the topic of access to resources. So there seems to be a gap between pro bono programs like Georgia Patents and actual real life inventors being able to afford patent services. And the qualifications for accessing those pro bono resources are limited to fairly low income individuals. And there's a band of people that I'm sure are coming up with great innovations that just don't have access to resources to be able to pursue protection.
That's a great point. Yes. So in order to qualify for like the Georgia Patents pro bono services, and I don't know, this is basically the USPTO pro bono patent program, Holly, which I'm sure you're somewhat familiar with. You have to meet like a poverty threshold, like the government's threshold for, well, not quite, maybe it's not poverty is the right word, but to be such of a low income status, but from the government threshold side. And there are lots of individuals who still can't afford, really the lawyers at your firm who could help them, but they're not wealthy, or they're not, they don't qualify for the pro bono services. So there's like a gap. So Brian, you're right. There's a gap between, those qualifying for pro bono and, some threshold beyond that, and then those who can actually afford for legal services. And I don't know if there are any initiatives to look at addressing folks that fall in the gap, or what is being discussed there. Holly, if you have any thoughts, or if anyone else has any thoughts.
I am not aware of any, but Brian raises an excellent point because there is a gap. And I think this is not just true for patenting law, but across the board, there are people who don't qualify for free legal services, but they certainly do not have the means to pay for lawyers at market rates. So it is a bigger problem, and I am hopeful that we can try to solve it, particularly for this issue, because if we increase the number of people who are inventing and patenting, the economic rewards for those people and for the country are so great that absolutely these legal services would be paid for over and over. So I think we have to keep our eye on the bigger ball. And some of the researchers that we work with found that we would have 4 times as many inventors in this country if we solve this problem, which how can you debate that? Just the both individual but societal wide benefits that would come from that are just so great.
Absolutely. Yeah, Dr. Lisa Cook, I shared earlier in the chat the links to her work and a recent interview with her, and she's pointed that out quite explicitly in her study. Let's see. I see a hand from Gail. Gail Gorvet, did you have a comment or a question?
Yes, thanks, Nicole. I just wanted to echo the point that was made about this. Oh, I keep getting turned off. Okay.
We can hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
I actually raised this issue on a broader level, the access to resources for small businesses in light of COVID. With the Georgia Bar, unfortunately, I have yet to get any kind of constructive feedback from them. But I don't know if there's anyone here who's represents the Georgia Bar. But I'm going to circle back again to them on this issue, because I think it affects people seeking to patent and protect intellectual property. But I think it also affects a large number of small businesses who might be having, financial difficulties, but who are not yet bankrupt.
Right.
And so I just want to echo the need for some kind of resolution to that income threshold. That we're in a particular time right now where we should be able to help companies and entrepreneurs on a pro bono basis without them being so impoverished.
I totally agree. I think that's a good way to close out our first opening discussion session. This was fantastic, and the chat has such a rich resource tool for people. For those not familiar with Teams, the chat history will stay in your profile. So you can absolutely go back to links that you might have missed or content that you might have missed earlier, or if you jumped on or jumped off. But it is 12:16 Eastern Standard Time. I want to honor our agenda. We are taking a 15-minute break. I don't know if that feels unnerving for people who love to be on their video conferences for hours and hours, but do something, check your email. We will start back right at 12:30 with Mira Dow and her talking about her work and her research with unequal profession and looking at the Academy for Race and Gender Issues, and moving sort of through some other parts of the same topic with different stakeholders and groups. So pause, go get some water, and we will see you in 15 minutes, or now 13 minutes.